Thanks for coming out today. I don't have any initial comments really. It's just good to see all of you today. I'm going to jump right in. I needed to take a break. I've been teaching the course, Just This Is It, Dangshan on the practice of suchness. And I had something else prepared. And then about a week ago, I was like, you know what? I need to deviate a little bit from what I've been doing for the past several months. So I referred back to classic Suzuki, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, which is one of my favorites. One of those classic Zen texts that I think it was Roger Lips early on when I was starting to get acclimated to the teachings. There was a few books that were highly recommended to me. It was Steve Hagen, Buddhism Plain and Simple, Suzuki, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, Charlotte Joko, Back Everyday Zen, and I think there's one other one. Just very, very great books, classic. So time and time again, I've circled back to these texts. And typical Zen fashion, every time I read it, it's just something new stands out, or I get more from it, or it just becomes more clear what these teachings are pointing to. And the Suzuki is every time I pick it up, it just seems like it's fresh. It's new. And there's something about, I don't even know if I should say this, but there's something about, I think Suzuki came from Japan, and there's something about the translation or English wasn't his first language, and I think this might be true for Katagiri as well, where there's something about Dharma teachings coming across in like a second language of English that strikes me as being helpful, because sometimes the words are incorrect, as they say, but I think that's actually helpful, at least in when I read this, the language I find to be very helpful versus a very straight on pointed language that's succinct, or maybe it's the Dharma teachings as in general. I just find something about the language in Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind to be very, very helpful. So nevertheless, this is going to be modeled after Nothing Special in Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. So our purpose is to just keep this practice forever. This practice started from beginningless time, and it will continue into an endless future. Strictly speaking, for a human being, there is no other practice than this practice. There is no other way of life than this way of life. Zen practice is a direct expression of our true nature. So when he's saying there is no other practice but this practice, at first that might seem jarring. Like he's saying that if we look at Zen as a religion, for example, our teaching is the only teaching that there is. This is the one true teaching, and that's not how he's intending that to come across. And we'll discuss this a little bit in the future here. But strictly speaking, there's no other practice than this practice. So he's really, he can see this, and he's saying what is true. Our practice is to live our life fully, to do the best we can. Norm, I think his coin was saying, Zen is showing up and doing your best. It's to come back to here and now over and over and over without end. There's no end to this. There's no beginning. So this practice actually doesn't have a beginning or an ending. Although it may seem that way. Maybe when we first start to practice, we think meditation starts with the bell. Well, if we've practiced here for any amount of time, we'll know that one of the foundational kind of teachings is that it doesn't take place. Zen meditation doesn't start with the bell. Meditation is right here, right now. And when we start to understand this, it becomes very evident that there is only this practice. This practice of coming back, taking up our life fully, wholeheartedly, as best we can. Just wholeheartedly engage with the moment. And looking at practice in that perspective, there's no choice. There's no choice but to show up for your life. Of course, whatever we do is the expression of our true nature, but without this practice, it is difficult to realize. And this brings up the question, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but Dogen's, I believe it was Dogen, his central question was, if we're already enlightened, if we're already awake, then why practice, you know? So if we already have our true nature, we are true nature, then why do we practice? Well, essentially it's because we get caught. We tend to live out of confusion or delusion. And this reminded me of a conversation that I had with, I was in the Air Force, and I was stationed at Grand Forks, North Dakota. And I had one of my master sergeants, somebody that I reported to, was in charge of us, had a view of human beings that I thought was at the time striking, you know. And I was talking to her about, it was either having kids, it might have been both, having kids, you know, because she was, you know, I don't know how old she was, but she was, you know, 40s, 50s, something like that. And she never had kids, you know, when she was married to another master sergeant that was on the base as well. And we got on this conversation about to have or to not have kids, you know. And her view was like she didn't want to have kids, and she didn't want to bring kids into this world because she felt that it was, she looked at human beings as sort of like parasites or ants or something like that, where, you know, all we do is we pollute the planet, you know, we just multiply, you know, we're like an infestation of the planet, you know. And that was her view, based on, you know, the pollution and all this stuff that she was seeing. And she didn't want to bring kids into a world like this. um, and the other thing that I think we were talking about was pollution. So basically, it was kids and pollution was the conversation, you know. And what that did, that conversation was kind of bring out my mind a little bit. You know, we're so uh, we live completely out of our limited views, you know, our own personal stuff. And rarely for me, I think I was 20, 21 at that point in time. And, you know, I was very much just, it was all about me and my life and what I'm going to get and what I want, you know. And just that conversation with her expanded my mind a little bit to look at you know, Earth from like a more holistic perspective. And I could see her point. I could see where she was coming from. Um, that we're you know, it just expanded my mind a little bit. So I was looking at this like from more wholly, from looking down as the population as a whole, one species of the entire planet. And what was interesting about that is all of us, there's millions, billions, I don't know how many people there are on this planet, but there's a lot, you know, beyond what I can fathom, you know. Um, and all of us are on this planet, and each of us truly believes that what we're doing is important, you know. So all of us have these motivations, this intention that might be driving us to be something or to get something done. And everybody has their own individual, you know, kind of scheme about what they're doing in life. So there's just something about that kind of jarred me out of my usual tunnel view of just all about me. And I found the conversation very helpful, actually. Maybe not necessarily for the content. I didn't necessarily believe, you know, in her views on that subject necessarily, but it helped me break out of my limited view. So we all tend to act in a way where we're the center. We have our plans and designs. And another teaching that I found very helpful here is rearranging furniture. It's like we're so busy getting the career, getting the house, raising the kids, doing the thing, But what we tend not to see is that we're just rearranging furniture. We're just moving things from one end of the house to the other, and it's all within this whole. And we tend to live completely out of our relative understanding. We don't see the whole. We don't have any insight to the whole. And so we tend to just operate completely out of a relative understanding, not seeing anything beyond that. However, even in the midst of our confusion, of our delusion, we are Buddha. There is Buddha nature. And this can't be negated. So even in our confusion, we are Buddha. And when we see delusion, we can realize this. That's actually what we wake up to is delusion. And it's a there's subtlety to our delusion. We might think delusion is just not having a helpful idea about something, but this comes down to the basic idea that something is substantial. So when there is no gaining idea in what you do, then you do something. And doing something is living here and now. It's full engagement with this moment, here and now. A Buddha does not act with intention. This teaching has been brought up here many times, but we do. We tend to operate out of our intentions, out of our plans and designs, our ideas about how something is or what we want to get done. We have models that we live out of. So a Buddha does not act with intention, which is actually incomprehensible. I know first time I heard that, I'm like, what do you mean a Buddha doesn't act with intention? Well, how does a Buddha act then? And I wanted to pin down what that is. So, but it's actually incomprehensible to act without intention. So you may feel it as if you are doing something special, but actually it is only the expression of your true nature. It is the activity which appeases your inmost desire. And this is not our standard model of desire. We have a desire, we have an idea in our mind about what's going to fulfill that desire. And it's not our standard way of looking at this. But our heart's most inner desire is to be awake. Our true nature is to be awake. To live out of this, to live out of this understanding, to live out our true nature, which isn't anything particular. There's no, again, this is incomprehensible, so there's no definition or model or idea that's going to pin that down. And this is practice enlightenment. And I believe Dogen coined this, practice awakening, practice enlightenment. But as long as you think you are practicing Zazen for the sake of something, that is not true practice. There's nothing to gain from Zazen. There's nothing to gain from meditation. So I'm also going to be using the book Homeless Kodo, which are teachings of Sawaki Roshi, who I believe is Uchiyama's teacher, Zen teachings of Homeless Kodo. So once a monk asked Long Ya, how did the ancient master finally cease doing things and completely settle down? Long Ya replied, it was like a thief slipping into a vacant house. Long Ya replied, So awakening is like a burglar breaking into an empty house. Although he had difficulty getting in, there's nothing to steal. He doesn't need to run. Nobody's after him. The whole thing is a flop. So then I added to this. So just sit down. You know, if you're breaking into a house to steal something, there's nothing to steal. Just sit down. But this is what we do. We'll approach meditation as if there's something to gain, you know, and we'll want to gain something from this, only to realize that there's nothing to gain. There's nothing to gain with this practice. So just settle down. Just sit down, you know, watch your mind. So if you continue this simple practice every day, you will obtain a wonderful power. Before you attain it, it is something wonderful. But after you obtain it, it is nothing special. It is just you, yourself, nothing special. So the wonderful power is to be yourself as you truly are, you know, which at first I was like, wonderful power. That sounds like something I got to get, you know, something I want to have, that wonderful power. But this is just being yourself as you truly are. To live in this, so there's another Kodo Sawaki quote that I'm about to say, and I just want to premise this with he can be quite crude in his teachings, which to be honest, I like, you know, some people may not, but just to premise it with that. So to live in this floating world is to wander from place to place pursuing mere titles. Each of us is born naked, but then we're given a name and registered. We're covered with clothes, a nipple is stuffed into our mouth, and so on. When we grow up, people say, this person is great, strong, clever, rich. We find such consolation in words, when in fact, everyone is simply naked. So this wonderful power is to live this naked reality. And I've always appreciated that word naked in relation to these teachings, because that points to it. You know, it's like we pile things on top, you know, of the experience, and we give labels, we have identities, we make things so complicated, you know. And Zen practice is about living out of the direct experience, here now reality, without things layered onto it. So it is a kind of mystery that for people who have no experience of enlightenment, enlightenment is something wonderful. But if they attain it, it is nothing. But yet it is not nothing. Do you understand? For a mother with children, having children is nothing special. That is Zazen. So if you continue this practice, more and more you will acquire something. Nothing special, but nevertheless something. Now, I used to get really upset when I would hear teachers say that, like, enlightenment is nothing special. It's no big deal, you know? And I used to think like, well, it's easy for you to say you have it, you know? And it just used to kind of be frustrating a little bit. Well, it's like, you make it sound so simple and stuff like that, but there is a misunderstanding in that. There was a misunderstanding in how I was taking that teaching. Because it isn't something that somebody has, you know, it's not something to obtain. And if it is, you already have it. You know, it's already yours, so to speak, even though that's not accurate. You are Buddha nature. So remember, I was having a conversation with my dad at one point in time, and it was either when my daughter was, you know, my partner was pregnant with our daughter, or it was sometime long before that. I can't quite remember, to be honest with you. But we had a conversation about what it was like to have children, you know. And I was curious. I was like, my dad has a couple kids, and how does your life change? Like, what is different about being a parent versus not being a parent? And it was interesting because he couldn't quite explain it to me. He couldn't quite muster the words to explain what the difference was. So he basically just said, I can't explain it, but your life is just different, you know. And what I was trying to do is figure out, is it better to have kids or is it better to not have kids, because I wanted to know. And it very much is related to a conversation that I had with Norm. I've told this story before. I'm going to tell it again, which is I came here early one day before meditation practice, and I knew Norm was sitting in the office there, as he usually did before meditation period. And I was going through a stint of loneliness at that time, and I really just was struggling with being single and not being able to find a partner. I didn't want to be single, and I asked Norm, I was like, Norm, are you ever lonely? And he said, no, he's not ever lonely. And I said, when was the last time you felt lonely? He said, 1971, and I was like, well, interesting that it could pinpoint what year it was, but it came across very truthful. I mean, he was telling me, his experience. And I got more curious, and I was like, um, uh, what is it about this feeling of loneliness? I'm lonely all the time. I can't seem to get rid of this feeling of loneliness. And then he went on to say, it's great to be single, um, it's great beyond comparison. It's also great to be in a relationship. And that was it, just very to the point. Both being single is great beyond comparison. Being in a relationship is great beyond comparison. And it's that comparison that was actually the heart of the issue. I hate to say this, but I can tell you truthfully, I haven't been lonely since that conversation. It might have been shortly after that, but he was pointing to something very helpful. And it's our comparison. It's our discrimination. That is the actual issue. So we acquire our naked selves in Zazen. And of course, this isn't really to acquire our naked self because it's there. When we express our true nature, we are human beings. When we do not know what we are. We are not an animal because we walk on two legs. We are something different from an animal, but what are we? We may be a ghost. We do not know what to call ourselves. Such a creature does not actually exist. It is a delusion. We are not human beings anymore, but we do exist. I'm not going to take the time to parse out this word exist, okay? We're just going to roll with it. The appearance of self is a delusion, and we tend to live completely out of this, this self, this conjured up self that's being referred to here. The appearances are illusory. However, we don't negate the appearances. So even in delusion, our true nature is there. And basically, and this did take me a while to parse out that paragraph, to be honest with you, because it was kind of tripped me up a little bit. But it's basically true nature, our Buddha nature, and self as a delusion. And so this is our conceptual self. This is the self that we try to convey to the world, So to live fully as a human being is to express our true nature. And human being, as Suzuki is using it here, is our Buddha nature, our true selves. So when Zen is not Zen, nothing exists. Intellectually, my talk makes no sense, but if you have experienced true practice, you will understand what I mean. If something exists, it has its own true nature, its Buddha nature. When we're caught by delusion, things appear substantial. We freeze basically by conceptualizing, it's like freezing reality. So by conveying this self onto the world, it's like freezing this self. And then we have an image that we have to please and protect, you know. When Zen is Zen, all beings are Buddha nature. When Zen is not Zen, appearances seem substantial. So in the Parinirvana Sutra, Buddha says everything has Buddha nature, but Dogen reads it in this way. Everything is Buddha nature. The difference is has Buddha nature implies that there's something maybe substantial that gets Buddha nature, you know. Is Buddha nature is that's our true nature, is Buddha nature. So when there is no Buddha nature, there is nothing at all. Something apart from Buddha nature is just a delusion. It may exist in your mind, but such things do not actually exist. So it's just Buddha nature. All right. So to close out here, I'm just going to read. I was going to try to add something to this, but to be honest with you, I think this is pretty good ending to this talk. While you are continuing this practice week after week, year after year, your practice will become deeper and deeper, and your experience will cover everything you do in your daily life. The most important thing is to forget all gaining ideas, all dualistic ideas. In other words, just practice Zazen in a certain posture. Do not think about anything. Just remain on your cushion without expecting anything. Then eventually you will resume your own true nature. That is to say, your own true nature resumes itself. A minute early. Comments or questions? Yeah.
Yeah. When the thief breaks into the empty room, I mean, I get an image of the thief alone, but it seems like the thief is breaking into the room that is empty with emptiness or shunyata. And that would be the Buddha nature that the thief already has. And that Buddha nature would be um, full of beings or half beings. And then compassion could be practiced and encounter could be practiced. What's your thought on that?
Well, sorry, what was the last thing you said? Compassion?
And encounter, encounter as compassion. So you're not, when you break into that empty room, it's not you alone in the room, it's you alone with emptiness in the room when emptiness is in touch with, in contact with all beings. And
Yeah.
so you get compassion.
Yeah, well, it's all emptiness. It's all empty. And so, we talk about things to try to be helpful with teachings. Compassion is there already. We don't have to try to conjure up compassion. But when we see the nature of emptiness, there's compassion that's already there. And with all beings, there's the relative world, and there's the absolute. These are not two, so it's all just this. So the thief breaking in has some intention, there's some intention there of getting an object, probably, or he's just breaking in for no reason, which maybe there's another issue there, but yeah, so breaking in, I think it's a good image to break in with some intention, to realize there's nothing there. In that moment, when you realize there's nothing to obtain here, then maybe we can see just this emptiness. Is that?
Yeah, I think that the nothing though is the nothing is the jewel or the stereo system that would sort of give you some rank. But then there's this other nothing, which is this rankless assembly. And so you actually break into a room that is crowded with all sorts of beings, including suffering beings.
Yeah. So I'm gonna use a quote right now, which is something I skipped over in my talk, but I think it's helpful at this point. All the Buddhas and all sentient beings are nothing but the one mind, beside which nothing exists. And another part that I skipped over in my talk is that the only actual distinction is awake or not awake, you know? And so we might break into a room and there's filled with beings. But what are those beings? You know, it's all emptiness. It's all just a one mind. And so it's just whether or not we can see that or whether we're caught by our confusion, in which case we think that there's some object to attain. Maybe I'm getting tripped up on
No,
what you're saying here.
no, I think in that empty room, there are confused beings.
What's the room? You know, what are the beings? What are the confused beings? You know, if there's only awakeness or not awakeness, how can we pick out who's confused and who's not? When we're doing that, when we're saying there's beings that are confused, we're kind of implying a substantiality that isn't really there. It's all empty. It's all empty.
And when we're saying that there are beings that are not confused, we're making that same implication.
Correct. Correct. So if we try to pin down who is awake and who is not awake, you know, it's incomprehensible. When you try to pin something down, that right there is delusion. We're confused, you know. So it's all flux and flow. It's all just a one mind. And anytime we try to put something there, that's you know confusion. That's delusion. And it's whether or not we see that. Can we see the delusion? Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry I didn't answer your question adequately.
No, I think you did.
Okay.
Yes, Bo, if practice does not begin or end when the bell rings, why do we have periods of formal meditation?
Because it's very helpful.
All right.
Yeah, thanks, Beau. So you mentioned issues around parenting a number of times in your talk. So I was just thinking, being a parent, for a lot of people provides a lot of meaning and, joy in their lives. On the other hand, it can be a great way to distract yourself and avoid stuff that you don't want to deal with, don't want to take care of. Can you just talk a little bit about the difference between what is sort of pursuing what is necessary and meaningful, as opposed to, as you say, rearranging the deck chairs or rearranging the furniture and, creating maybe a distraction?
Yeah. So I appreciate what you said about it's almost like parenting is an
Right.
avoidance tactic.
Right.
So that's actually new to me, to be honest with you. I sometimes avoid parenting, because it's very challenging, as far as like meaning and I'm trying to understand your question
Yeah,
correctly.
right. I mean, some things are necessary, they have to
Yeah.
be done, and I actually enjoy it, and it's meaningful, and it's sort of what my life is all about. On the other hand, it's also a way to say, gee whiz, I'd love to sit here and talk to you about your feelings or talk about, worry about my job or my health or my money problems, but, the children need me, so I need to kind of drop that and avoid like maybe some of the other things.
Yeah, I
Or
think.
making yourself busy is a way of avoiding what you need to be thinking about.
Yeah, well, anytime we're trying to avoid, it's like picking and choosing, what's better, what's not better, what I want to do with my time versus what I don't. That just realize, just watch your mind, and notice that. I don't think there's more to be done, you know. With parenting, I will say that it's a full-time job, and I think it's a pretty valid excuse if you got to take care of things, Um, but yeah, we just come back to this moment here and now and try not to pick and choose, this moment, every moment here and now is complete, it's whole, and there's no other moment that we need to get to. But this is what we often fall into, is wanting to get to that next moment or to that next thing that's going to hopefully make us more fulfilled. So when it's our leaning mind, leaning away from this or towards that. So that's kind of what I hear you expressing. Well, that being said, parenting is like it's got its own unique challenges, and to answer my own question, and I asked my dad, what's better, having kids or not having kids, both are great beyond comparison. There are times when it seems like, yeah, it might be nice to live the single life and not have any you know uh, expectations or duties to have. But at the same time, I wouldn't change this for the world. So I think both are great beyond comparison. Does that answer?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. It always comes back to watching our own mind. It's up to us. Can we fully engage in what's happening, the here and now, or are we trying to escape? Or are we trying to avoid? This push and pull that we're constantly engaged in. I mean, that's really where practice is helpful. Sitting sessions, for example, is very helpful. To go through the process of being uncomfortable. Pulling weeds, as I heard early on in my exploration of these teachings. Anyways, I'm gonna stop talking. Any other questions? Thank you.